Hey everyone, welcome back to D2 Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We'll be continuing with the next chapter of Lottocracy. Without any further ado, let's get into a quick recap and get started. Last time, I found myself reeling from the aftermath of my attempted assassination, facing the media and the chairman and chairwoman. Wong insisted that gaming could have had nothing to do with my fate, and showed me evidence that my assailant was a long-time Lottocracy hater in the making. Matt and Megan butted heads over what direction the country should go as a result of a pitch-a-thon of bills that Reyes set up for us, and I had to take over listening for them. They were mostly a bunch of garbage, but one bill, proposed by Lisa Fay, caught my attention. She proposed a ballot initiative that would give the people the choice to end the Lottocracy. Chapter 3. The Worst Form of Government. A vote to end the Lottocracy? I asked Representative Fay. I will not pretend to be completely shocked by it. Given the lead-up to her suggestion, it seemed all but certain to be going there. That said, it still felt unreal to hear someone suggest ending the Lottocracy. It was surely a thought people had from time to time, especially when the country was doing poorly. No one truly considered suggesting ending it, though. After all, how could anyone? Anytime it would come up in a conversation, the awkwardness of such a radical suggestion was brushed off with a simple, "And how are we going to do that? We don't have the power to vote for it." That did not work for me anymore. I had a part to play in this extraordinary production of randomly generated drama. "That's exactly right," she said back to me. "Not ending it outright, which I think I might prefer, but letting the people decide if they want to go back." I saw Isabella, still in the back of the frame, standing frozen. She clearly wanted some way to end this conversation, and was calculating the least abrupt way to do it. "Gosh, but so few people remember what it was like before the Lottocracy," I said. "Is that something we can put on them to even think about? We're supposed to take that burden off of them, decide what's right for them so they don't have to." "And so, what if we decide what's right for them is for them to decide?" she asked me, staring intently. Hey, interesting stuff for sure," Isabella finally said. "But we didn't give everyone else this amount of time, so I'm thinking we need to move on. Co-Governor Donovan could probably use a bathroom break before our last 100 suggestions, too?" "That's fair," Lisa said. "Sorry to eat up so much time." She picked up her folder and left to go out the door. Before she stepped out, she looked back at the camera and shot me a bit of a smirk, a quiet way of communicating that she was aware of the chaos she just unleashed. Isabella looked somewhat distressed. I noticed she was actually drinking her coffee rather than just holding it in her hand as a prop. This reminded me of how her Senate counterpart Wong constantly reshuffled his papers when he seemed flustered. I wondered to myself if Gammon had a nervous tic. Maybe his was shooting people in the chest. "Alrighty," Isabella said, finger gun back in action. "How about we take 5 and then resume?" "So you're telling me I have 5 minutes to find either Matt or Megan to swap in for me?" I asked. She chuckled a bit, still seeming so nervous, then left the room, now out of view of the camera. I stepped out as well. I looked down one end of the hall and saw no one but security guards. I looked down the other and saw Matt on the phone. I hurried over to go see if I could take the opportunity to swindle him into sitting for the last 100 petitions for Anteater Day to become a national holiday, or whatever people had left in store. No, Senator, I'm glad you're willing to discuss raising funding for welfare benefits," he said, someone sounding a bit irate on the other end. "I just think those restrictions and requirements are a bit much." I heard vaguely the voice on the other end sound increasingly frustrating, but I could not make out the details. "What do you mean, what other welfare programs will we have to cut to fund it?" Matt asked, sounding bewildered. "There are people who depend on this stuff to stay alive. How can you be so heartless?" I heard a click and a buzz as the phone disconnected. Matt let out a frustrated huff. "D2, I really don't get these people," he said to me. "I'm laying out a clear fact-based plan of what we need to do to improve life for the poorest of our people, and they want to all negotiate it with me. I don't want to negotiate whether people should have basic human rights." His face looked tired. He must have been wheeling and dealing since I stepped in for the pitch-a-thon. Based on his level of energy when I met him, he clearly thought his charm and passion were going to carry him towards making a better world in his eyes. If we did end the Lottocracy, there's no doubt he would find his way back here and attempt it all again. "Isn't there any low-hanging fruit you can give them?" I asked. "I know you don't feel like you should have to, but this is a multi-chambered government. There's no way everyone is going to get everything they want." "I guess I just don't see human needs as something worth compromising on," he said. "It's not even like I'm not willing to give certain things up. I just oppose even acknowledging this is something worth discussing." His tone with me got sterner. I could tell I made a misstep. It felt like the same kind of misstep I often made with Vicky, giving her advice when she clearly just wanted to vent. "I get that," I said, somewhat telling the truth. "Hey, maybe there's some ideas in this last 100 suggestions that you can push through without compromising." I gave him a smile and a nudge, half playful about trying to get anyone but me back in there. He just shook his head. "Listen, man, to you all those pitches are an annoyance and inconvenience," he said. "To me, some of them are downright offensive. Megan's in the room just over. Go see if you can get her to cover. I nodded. He pointed to a door down the middle of the hallway. I walked over and opened it to see Megan. She was alone in a conference room, with many papers strewn about it. 2 chairs, one to each side of her, was pulled out. She looked a little downtrodden, but looked up at me and smiled pleasantly when she saw me. "Oh, Mr. Donovan," she said. "Maybe you could help me with some of these new debate procedures I'm trying to write. I had 2 staffers in here, but they stormed out on me." I looked over. She was in the middle of a lengthy document about procedure from 6 years ago. This was thought to be one of the most efficient sets of debate proceedings implemented at the Capitol. It narrowly failed to override a veto that prevented it from becoming the standard set. I read that in a book, I think. I know the book also went into how the procedure worked, but for some reason I failed to retain information like that. "Maybe I can take a look while you go field more suggestions?" I asked, smiling. "What made the staffers storm out on you?" "Young people are just so sensitive these days, Mr. Donovan," she said. "This one young staffer had a blouse with such light straps showing so much of her shoulders, and I suggested that if she wanted to find a decent husband, she should dress more respectably. She seemed nice, and I was only trying to help her be a happy woman someday." It took a degree of self-control not to visibly wince at that. I tried to form my words carefully in light of my failure to guide the ship of my conversation with Matt safely into the dock. "I think it's a generational thing. You also did things that your parents didn't understand or approve of, right? I think we just have to accept that some people do things differently than what we like." Her eyes narrowed. My ship was hitting rock hard and fast. "Not me," she said. "And I also never heard of one person, not multiple, wanting to be called a they/them, let alone get angry when I tell them I won't do it. Have you ever heard of such a crazy thing?" I stared a bit blankly at her. Vicky and I ran the closest thing to a quote-unquote trendy cafe in the suburbs of Rockwell. Not only was I aware of many people with multicolored hair who existed outside of the gender binary, they were some of my favorite customers. Telling her this would be akin to throwing a rock at a beehive. While I thought of how to defuse this, I looked at my watch. "Oh, damn it," I said to myself. I was approaching 10 minutes from when my 5-minute reprieve started. If I waited much longer, Isabella would appear and drag me with her free arm back into the camera room herself. "I guess I gotta get back to the representatives," I said. "Try to be considerate of others, even if you don't understand them. We have to work with most of these people for the next 4 years, and we do need to give them some basic respect." I hurried out before I could hear any protest or see the angry look on her face. In my rush out the door, I nearly collided with Chief Gammon, who was outside waiting for me. "Go, Governor," he said. "A word, if you have some time?" The last person I wanted to talk to was keeping me from the last thing I wanted to be doing. This was a real rock and a hard place type situation. "I am pretty late to getting back to the representatives who arranged some time with us." Gammon shook his head. "I heard about that before coming over here. I told Miss Reyes to have that canceled," he said. "It's nearly 6 o'clock. She needs to learn that even if she doesn't, some of us still eat balanced meals and don't live off just coffee." I feel like the representatives might feel cheated by that. "She's a crafty young lady. She'll make up something to keep them satisfied. She always does," he said. "I wanted to talk a little bit about today." I tried not to audibly groan. I was doing everything in my power to play it cool. "The intruder was led in by a door guard who was persuaded that he was a new representative who lost his badge. That guard has been suspended without pay for a severe violation of our most basic protocol. I will use this to reinforce with my staff the importance of these basic rules and what goes wrong when they aren't followed. Of course, I did realize something else, however." "What is that?" I asked. He sighed. "I am told I can be quite stubborn. I don't see it this way. There are just certain things I do that I know are right and think they need to be done that way. Even so, the events of today have caused me to call into question some of the things I hold to be right." I looked at him, surely unable to hide how fully surprised this made me. "I have never had a co-governor as much as injured under my watch here at the Capitol, and I assumed that was because my security was unimpeachable. It clearly is not. I clearly have also never had a co-governor killed when they return home for the holidays, where they are merely flanked by 2 of my top guards." It looked like he was dreading everything he was saying, which confounded me. "So, starting tomorrow, I will let you come and go as you please, so long as you let my rotation of 2 officials tail you wherever you go to keep you as safe as you can," he said. "I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive me for being so strict with you earlier." Yeah, I can do that." "Thank you, Co-Governor Donovan," he said. I even saw him smile, I think, for the first time ever. "Now, if you will, please let me show you to your suite," he said. "Our chef here at the complex has prepared dinner for you. I am not a man who appreciates fancy things, but let me tell you, Chef Cassidy rarely gets anything short of high praise from anyone he serves." I followed Gammon across the complex to a suite that had my name on it. 2 security guards stood outside and nodded at me. I assumed these 2 were to be my first rotation for the time being. I was about to ask them for their names before Gammon opened the door and started to push me in there. People here are far too willing to move me around for my liking. "Good night, co-governor," he said. "Good night, Chief," I said back to him. He paused in the doorway for just a moment. His face looked concerned and thoughtful. I had no idea what he was thinking or what he was about to say. "I've been told in the past to try and avoid sharing my political beliefs with selected officials," he said. "Wong and his father before him said it implies an inappropriate influence, given my position. I tend to agree with that, but I always make one exception." "What's that?" I asked him. "Don't throw away this Lottocracy. Don't do anything that would even allow for the ending of the sortition," he said. I looked shocked. He had obviously discussed this with Isabella, and I assume Wong as well. Was this why his disposition suddenly changed? Did he think if he kept me like a caged bird, it would only guarantee that I would try to push for democracy as a way of freeing myself? Maybe Wong thought this, and told him he needed to do it. Either way, everything was made much clearer by this. "Wong's late father used to have a saying I liked," he said. "He would say, 'It has been said that Lottocracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time.'" Something about this quote did ring familiar to me. I could imagine myself hearing that quote in a moving speech, and then having the speaker get me riled up to go fight on the beaches, or something like that. "I like the saying because it's true. You're too young to remember, but back when people could elect their own government, things were awful. Career politicians, often sons and daughters of other career politicians, formed factions with one another and created gridlock on issues that mattered. The only thing that passed was legislation that enriched the corporations of those who lined their pockets in return," he said. "It was truly awful, and if I ever had to advise you on anything, please don't even create a chance for us to have to go back to that." Before even giving me a chance to respond, he made a small wave and walked away. His face was so solemn in those last moments. My feelings on this situation softened a little. Gammon was a complex man, a flawed one to be sure, but he had a set of principles and values he lived by, like Matt and Megan. The difference between him and the 2 of them is that he had one he was willing to sacrifice all the others to keep, and that was his faith in Lottocracy. He gave me a lot to think about as I sat down at the kitchen table of my suite. A meal tented in foil awaited me, and I undid the packaging. My eyes lit up. It was a salmon BLT. There was this kind of spicy honey mustard on the side, and the plate was packed to the brim with crispy-looking sweet potato fries, just lightly coated with the smallest bit of cinnamon. I recognized all this near immediately, and that was because the cafe signature lunch special was something just like this. Though as I dug in and took a quick bite after slathering the sandwich, I quickly realized they had access to much higher quality fish and bacon than we had. The second bite I took firmed up my resolve to veto that Meatless Mondays legislation if it ever made its way to my desk. The country deserved to eat a meal this delicious, regardless of what day of the week it was. After a few bites of bliss and a handful of sweet potato fries, I noticed there was a TV mounted to the wall. Some dinnertime entertainment might be nice. I flipped it on and prepared to start channel surfing. We continue our coverage of the top story of the day, a co-governor and an attempted assassination, all right within our own nation's capital. We turn to Natalie in the field to get more information. Flipping from that. And tonight on ISPN, the women's table tennis tournament is about to kick off, but all of the competitors are taking a quick moment of silence in solidarity with co-governor Donovan in light of the attempt on his life. Lots of support from the women's table tennis team, for some reason. Moving on. Tonight, we're going to be making a special dish, an apple walnut cake. This is actually a baked good you can find at the co-governor's cafe for those wondering how this ties into the events of the day. I swear before today, no one cared what happened in the Capitol aside from me. Was this really that big of a deal? I went up a channel once more. What's the deal with this anti-Lottocracy movement? Click. Oh my God, Corinna, you can't just say stuff like that. A woman, who I presumed to be Kayana Karada, said. Yes, I can. You can say whatever you want in this country. Everyone knows that, Corinna said. As I shoved more fries in my mouth, I debated if this is really how I plan to spend my evening. My wife would have a field day with this. I wonder if I should send her a text or call about something they say. There's a good chance she had this on in the background. Surely that's true, Corinna, but do you really think people should be inciting violence, and do you think other influencers with a platform on Kling Klang have a responsibility to condemn it? A male voice said. Yes, of course it was Balsa Wood. Who else could it be? He is apparently an omnipresent entity who exists solely to accost me when I least expect it. He appeared to be teleconferencing in from a hotel room of some kind. I guess the cost of on-site housing for 300 representatives was a cost we could not ask the taxpayers to bear. The ladies seemed deep in thought on this question. That's a good question, Jimmy. I guess they should. I do kind of get why some people would want to get rid of the Lottocracy, though, Kayana said. Really? I can't even figure out how to pay my taxes, Corinna said. Why would we trust everyday people to vote on who decides taxes? Balsa would, or rather Jimmy, nodded his head quietly, just letting this discussion play out. Well then, what do we do if someone like you got picked for the sortition? She said. Oh God, I think I'd go mad with stress, Corinna said. I don't know how you handle it, Jimmy. It's an interesting experience so far, he said. I'm still trying to balance my show and my column with my new responsibility to Ispia. I know a lot of things about a few areas, but I try to rely on colleagues I trust with expertise in areas I don't have. That's like so totally smart, Kayana said. I would do that too, for sure. I continued to watch the show as the evening rolled on, eventually texting my wife and confirming she was in fact watching. We poked fun at the two social media stars and their understanding of government, fully aware that they could be future senators in the making under our system. After some time, though, I decided to hit the hay after a truly chaotic day. Tomorrow was the first real session of our government, and I needed to be fully rested. I got up the next day. It was a little rainy and colder than it had been the day before. I brushed my teeth and put on my old suit and tie, not having planned to wear it 2 days in a row. Fortunately for me, it was not in too bad of a state. Then, as I stepped out of my room, I was a little disappointed but also unsurprised to see Wong in the hallway waiting for me. I wondered if this trio bothered Megan and Matt on a rotation too, or was it something that only I got the honor to experience? Co-Governor, good morning to you, he said, cheery as ever. Good morning, Alf, I said to him. I'm standing here to let the three of you know that there will be food in both chambers this morning, prior to the start of the proceedings, he said. Normally, by default, eating in the chambers is prohibited, but the standard house rules does make an exception for the first day, and Isabella seems to think it helps with attendance to have food. Of course, if we wanted, we could always change the rules to allow for it every day, couldn't we? I joked. Well, of course, yes, Wong said quite defensively. You can change anything to suit your needs as long as it's put to a vote. That's the nature of our Lottocracy, and I never meant to imply otherwise. I was just pulling your leg, man, I said, feeling a little bad. I walked myself over to the Chamber of Representatives for food, a decision made partly by assuming they would have a wider array of food options, and partly because I'd be on a level playing field with people who were also new to the government. Megan must have had the same kind of calculus done because I saw her in the room, spreading cream cheese on a bagel. I waved at her, and she politely waved back. I took this as a good sign that she was not too annoyed with me yesterday. I went to get my own breakfast when I noticed across the room that Lisa and Isabella seemed to be having a discussion. I was not quite able to make out what they were saying from where I was, but it looked like they were arguing. It was not exactly a mystery as to what they were probably discussing. I saw that Lisa had a series of papers in hand. It looked like she was a prolific legislator, or had planned on doing something like this if she ever had the opportunity for a while now. Something did seem a bit off, though. Isabella looked distressed, as if she had not been sleeping, and more concerned about the bill than I thought one would be, even if you loved Lottocracy that much. Come to think of it, did she really love the sortition that much? She seemed quite proficient at her job, and even acted like she enjoyed it. However, she lacked the kind of true passion for the institution itself that Wong so clearly wore on his chest. Though, I would have also never guessed Gammon to be such a true believer in the sortition. Maybe she had her own similar personal reasons for wanting it. Yo, D-squared, Matt said, interrupting my thought and patting me on the back. Sorry if I was a bit of a jerk yesterday. I was kind of stressed out dealing with some things. Didn't mean to take it out on you. You're good, man, I said. Before I noticed it, Lisa had taken her seat, and a still somber-looking Isabella rose to the front of the room to stand at the podium. My wonderful Ispian representatives of the House, welcome to the first day of your legislative session. As dictated in the existing House rules, we will start by going in alphabetical order to see who has any legislation they'd like to introduce. Representative Abdo, please raise your placard if you have any motion to put forward. Eyes turned to the young man, but it seemed he had nothing to present. Thank you, Representative. Moving on to Representative Adley. A young woman, her name I believe to be Monica Adley, raised her placard. Isabella gestured for her to come up and stepped aside to give her the podium. My fellow representatives, she said, I am putting forward a piece of legislation that I think is long past due. It is time we put forward a bill to take down any statues of Ralph Wiley in any government buildings. It seemed like in a mere instant there were a near equal chorus of groans and cheers. She continued and tried to keep control of the room. I will now read the exact language of my bill, she said. I turned to Matt on my left and whispered, Shoot, who was he again? I know I've heard the name before. "The second to last elected president of Ispia," he said. "He was so damn corrupt in the pockets of corporations. When it spilled out how much stock he had and how he manipulated direct awards to all the companies he was tied in with, it easily cost his party the election and made way for Wong's dad to win a campaign almost solely on creating the sortition." Right, it's coming back to me now. I did learn about that in school. Why do we still have statues of him then? Some parts of the South still supported him in spite of the scandal. He was from there after all. Some people consider him to be a sort of anti-sortition symbol, but honestly, it's a bunch of contrarians from the countryside who like him because he was allegedly tough on crime in the cities. I nodded. In hindsight, I do think I remember seeing a statue one time when Vicky and I took a trip down south to see some of her cousins. I can understand how people might feel resentful of someone like that being around. It would almost be as bad as if you put up statues and flags to dedicate to people who helped try and lead a rebellion against your own country. Even worse so if they were doing it for a terrible reason. Representative Adley finished reading her bill, and the room seemed to be filled with a lot of energy. Isabella took the reins and started speaking again. "All right, and now we have time for everyone to give their comments. Representative Abdo, do you wish to use your time?" Representative Abdo declined to wave his placard again. I was getting the sense that he did not want to be here. "Do we really go alphabetically through everyone?" I asked Matt. "Yeah, we just went over this yesterday. Did you fall asleep during the explanation of procedure?" he asked me back. I paused to avoid saying that I probably did. Representative Appleton did take the opportunity to speak. "Yeah, I want to throw my support behind this measure," he said. "I think that for too long we have let people pretend he's a figure worth letting our government commemorate. Acts of violence as seen yesterday showed that we cannot allow such hateful figures to be propped up like that." My eyes narrowed. I can say with certainty that my assailant had nothing to do with Wiley, but I guess far be it from me to be someone else's political token. I noticed Megan talking with someone in the corner of the room. I was not quite sure what she was doing until I saw that woman walk up as Isabella called a Representative Asher to the podium. "I'd like to yield my time to Co-Governor Hoffman," she said. "I forgot they can do that," I said. "Oh, I bet this'll be good," Matt said. "Ladies and gentlemen, with our country so wrapped with unemployment and a rising divorce rate, are these truly the issues you want to send up to our desk? A bill that erases our history? We want to destroy the statue of someone who had the support of our people at one point. At this rate, it's only a matter of time before we call to destroy all statues." "Is that divorce stat even true?" I asked. I looked to my left to see Matt was long gone. Looks like he had found Representative Axwell and was making a case to him to get him to yield his time over to him. Axwell took the podium and did just that. Megan and him scowled at each other as he was called up to speak. "Hello, my fellow Ispians," he said. "I think we all know about the history of Mr. Wiley and why he was a disaster for our country. But his tough-on-crime attitude was also a particular disaster for folk like me in Ispia." I found myself getting moved. He was a passionate speaker. "And I just have to say, if you don't support a bill like this, you must really hate me and all the city kids who grew up under police crackdowns. So please vote yes." He lost me, and by the sound of the raucous chamber, a lot of the people who might have been on his side. Trouble in paradise already? I turned to see Lisa was now next to me. She seemed amused by the conflict. At the rate those two are going, I think one or both of them are going to leave their term early or end up hurting the other, I said. I paused and looked her directly in the eyes. "But what about you? That looked like a tense conversation you were having with Isabella." For some reason she really wants me to not put that bill forward," she said. "She's somewhat hysterical about it. I don't even think if people did vote to end the Lottocracy, which isn't a guarantee at all, that anyone would be able to fill her shoes here. Not in her lifetime, anyway." I stopped to mull this over. Maybe that was it. Gammon, Wong, and Reyes were so used to having their jobs basically guaranteed here that the idea of Lottocracy ending and career politicians returning to the government stressed them out. I mean, any career politician by default would be way more stubborn and difficult than I was, and look how much they had on their hands with me. A Representative Baldwin took the podium next. He yielded his time to a Representative Medina, a young tan man with a perfectly fitting, high-quality suit and a too-wide, very white smile took the stand. I watched him carefully, as he almost seemed like he was getting ready to make a joke rather than a floor speech. He began. "My fellow representatives, are we truly going to allow this divisive bill, the time of day, a bill to step on the rights of our southern countrymen?" he said, using his hands a lot. "I say nay, never. The elimination of such statues is just a plot by the Marxists and degenerates of this country to push their agenda forward." The room erupted into a mix of boos and a cheer here and there as well. Matt looked particularly agitated, only a few steps down from the podium. Megan smiled. Isabella desperately gabbled to try and make the room return to order to allow Medina to have his full speaking time uninterrupted. "Who the hell is this guy?" I asked Lisa. That's Roberto Medina, Jimmy Balsawood answered instead. He was apparently a low-level employee of Rainforest Corporation before this, though I think he might have a promotion or two waiting for him if he plays his cards right. My mind flashed back to Stapleton. That was exactly the kind of thing he had been concerned about per that file. He thought the sortition was rigged by corporations who just put their own people in office. Rainforest Corporation, like one of the 5 companies in Ispia that owns everything. Wonder why he's so invested in a statue bill then. Also, when did you get here? That's the one. And why he's interested here beats me. Almost seems like he's just riling people up and against each other, the tabloid reporter said. Anyway, I'm up next. Lisa stepped outside to take a call. You really need to work on your spatial awareness. Maybe I needed to focus a bit more on that. Medina stepped down after his inflammatory speech. I also noticed at some point Isabella handed off her gavel and facilitating duties to her deputy. The young representative by day, reporter by night, took to the podium after being called up. He shuffled a few papers in front of him before starting. Good morning, ISP News, he said. Oh, shoot, wrong page. Good morning, my fellow representatives. I would like to express my support for this bill. However, I think an exception should be made for the Ispia Museum of History, which has a statue of the Capitol that was toppled after the sortition started and is a government-run museum. I have already instructed a staffer to have a revision written up during the unmod to make this inclusion. I hope the author will accept. That is all. With that thoughtful commentary, surely being the last speech to avoid ad hominem attacks, I decided to step out for a bit. I could not stand witnessing any more of that discussion. I also wanted to continue my conversation with Lisa to see exactly what Isabella had been telling her about the bill. However, I hardly made it 4 steps into the main entrance when down a hallway I heard a familiar sound, just barely able to be heard from outside the chamber. Die, you filthy lottocrat! I heard a woman's voice scream for a second before it got muffled. I bolted down in the direction of the sound. I knew it! I shouted to myself. That bastard has one single trick up his sleeve. I turned the hallway, expecting to see Gammon putting a bullet in another man's head. Instead, I found a man collapsed on the floor, holding his jaw. There was some blood on the floor and what looked like a trail. I stared at him in shock. That lady kicked my teeth out, was the rough approximation of what I heard. I paid this would-be assailant no mind as I ran down following the trail of blood. Lisa must have been one tough cookie to pull out of that one on top, considering the surprise attack. I followed the trail of blood to an office, but I did not check to see whose it was. As I burst into the room, I laid eyes on something I could not have imagined before seeing it myself. Lisa was on the ground. A wound in her neck was still obviously bleeding. In the office of the House Facilitating Chairwoman, the chairwoman herself, Isabella Reyes, was straddling the representative with hands nearly right around her neck. She looked up at me in horror. Every part of whatever her plan was falling apart all around her. She stammered for a moment, looking down at Lisa and back at me. All she could muster to say was, I had to do it. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Lottocracy. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast on the app, give it a like on YouTube, and share with anyone who you think might also enjoy. Lottocracy is a D2 Stories production. You can stay up to date with Lottocracy and all future D2 Stories productions by following us on social media. That'll be D2 Stories across just about any of the big platforms. I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again next week.